It began as the kind of flight no one remembers. The passengers had boarded in silence, shuffling down the narrow jet bridge, each one burdened with their own thoughts, their own private destinations. The aircraft, a routine transcontinental flight, was filled with the low hum of cabin fans, the shuffling of luggage into overhead bins, and the muted greetings of flight attendants trained to make everyone feel calm, even when flying wasn't second nature. Among the passengers was a woman who drew no attention. She slipped into her seat by the window in the middle rows. No one gave her a second glance. She didn't demand help with her bag, didn't speak to her seatmates, didn't even remove her sunglasses until the plane was halfway into the clouds. She was quiet. Not shy exactly, but invisible. The sort of traveler who melts into the background. The kind of passenger who never makes headlines. For the first 2 hours, the flight was uneventful. The captain's voice floated through the speakers with updates. Smooth air at cruising altitude, a headwind slowing them down, but nothing out of the ordinary. The passengers flipped open laptops, ordered coffees, or nodded off to sleep. Even the flight attendants settled into the rhythm of routine service, rolling the cart down the aisle, smiling mechanically, checking seatbelts and tray tables. But in the control towers on the ground, something strange was already happening. The aircraft's transponder signal, that digital heartbeat that tells air traffic controllers exactly where a plane is and who it belongs to, and had started flickering, not disappearing entirely, not enough to cause panic, but enough to register as a disturbance. Every few minutes, the flight's identifying code blinked off radar screens, then reappeared. Controllers assumed it was a technical glitch. It happened sometimes, but then the chatter between regional ATC centers began to grow uneasy. The signal irregularities were spreading, not just transponder issues, but strange interference on the emergency frequencies, as if a ghostly voice was trying to bleed through static. And that was when NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, was notified. Inside the cavernous halls of NORAD's command center, officers trained to expect the worst leaned forward in their chairs. Radar feeds from across the continent flowed in real time, and there it was, a commercial jet, flight plan perfectly ordinary, cruising over restricted airspace. Yet something about its transmissions didn't match. Something wasn't right. Within minutes, a decision was made. An intercept would be ordered. From an airbase less than 200 miles away, the shriek of afterburners cut through the sky as 2 F-22 Raptors roared upward. Pilots strapped into the cockpits had done this drill before, countless times. Scrambles happened for lost radio contact, for wandering private jets, even for careless commercial flights straying off course. 99% of the time it ended with nothing more than a wave from the cockpit and a quiet escort back to normalcy. But this time, the tension was different. The brief was short, almost clipped. Unidentified interference. Maintain visual. Await further instruction. As the Raptors closed the distance, the passengers on board had no idea. Drinks were being poured. Movies flickered on seatback screens. A baby cried softly in row 12. And in row 17 by the window, the quiet woman simply sat still, her hands folded over a small leather bag that never left her lap. She hadn't spoken a word to anyone since boarding. The only sign that something was different came when she reached into her bag, pulled out a phone that should have been locked in airplane mode, and placed it against her ear. No one noticed, except her seatmate, who only thought it odd for a moment, then turned back to his book. But the signal from that phone was what made the F-22 pilots freeze. They were closing in, sleek silhouettes against the bright horizon, their targeting sensors painting the commercial aircraft. Inside their helmets, a sudden burst of sound cracked into their comms. Not the chatter of controllers, not static, a woman's voice, calm, steady, speaking on a frequency she should never have been able to reach. "If you can hear this," the voice said, "do not approach closer." The pilots jolted. For a heartbeat, they thought it was a prank, some scrambled echo. But the signal was clean, sharp, and riding directly on their secure military band. That was impossible. No civilian passenger could ever break through. One pilot reached for his comm switch. "Say again." "Identify yourself." Silence. Then the same voice, unwavering. "Divert now. This aircraft is not what you think it is." Back on the ground, NORAD controllers monitoring the intercept suddenly heard it too. Dozens of trained officers used to handling everything from hijackings to false alarms, All stopped what they were doing. The room fell silent except for that voice bleeding through encrypted lines. And somewhere in the middle of the cabin, the quiet passenger, still unnoticed by everyone around her, closed her eyes as if bracing herself. The F-22 pilots exchanged glances they couldn't see but could feel. Their checklists, their training, all told them this wasn't possible. Yet the voice was there, cutting through like a knife. And when they looked at the aircraft's windows trying to catch sight of the cockpit, something else unsettled them. The captain and first officer weren't moving. The figures behind the glass sat motionless, hands on controls as if frozen in time. The commercial jet was flying straight and level, but its pilots weren't flying it, at least, not in any way that made sense. Inside the cabin, the passengers remained blissfully unaware. Some laughed at a comedy playing on screens, others ordered sodas. One man snored loudly against the window. The flight attendants exchanged weary glances about turbulence ahead. To them, it was routine. Nothing strange at all, but 30,000 feet outside, the quiet passenger's voice was echoing across military channels, and the world's most advanced fighter pilots found themselves hesitating, their hands hovering over controls they never thought twice about using. One pilot whispered into his mic, almost to himself, "What the hell are we dealing with here?" And for the first time in his career, he felt a flicker of fear. The silence inside NORAD's command center was heavier than steel. Dozens of analysts, controllers, and officers stared at their consoles, listening as the woman's voice repeated on the encrypted frequency, calm and unwavering. It wasn't a distress call. It wasn't interference. It was deliberate, precise, and meant only for the F-22 shadowing that jet. The lead pilot steadied his breathing. "Say again. Identify yourself," he demanded, his voice tight. His training told him to take control, to assert authority, but something about the tone of the woman's words made him falter. There was a pause. Then, "If you push closer, you won't get another chance to turn back. I am asking you, do not force this." The wingman glanced at the instruments. Everything looked normal, speed steady, altitude consistent. Yet when he peered through the canopy at the cockpit of the airliner, the stillness of the flight crew gnawed at him. No movement. No acknowledgement. Just frozen silhouettes under the glare of cockpit glass. On the ground, the incident had already climbed up the chain of command. Senior officers huddled, weighing the risk of escalation. A commercial airliner inside restricted airspace with irregular signals was a nightmare scenario. But now a mystery voice, a civilian somehow breaking into encrypted military comms. It wasn't in any protocol. And deep inside the cabin, row 17, the quiet woman continued to speak without moving her lips. To her seatmate, she was just sitting calmly, eyes closed, her phone pressed to her ear. But her voice was reaching places it should never reach. The pilots were ordered to maintain visual shadow. They didn't move closer. For the next 20 minutes, the bizarre standoff continued. The Raptors flanking at a cautious distance, the airliner cruising silently, and the woman's voice occasionally breaking the airwaves with short, cryptic instructions. Altitude stable. Do not disturb the balance. Your radar picture is incomplete. Trust what you see, not what you're told. The words sounded less like warnings and more like riddles. But what unsettled the pilots most was the absolute certainty in her voice. Whoever she wasn't guessing. She knew something. The first real break came when the flight attendants tried to enter the cockpit. A passenger in row 1 watched with mild curiosity as a crew member knocked, then swiped the access code. The door opened a fraction, then stopped. She tried again, harder, and the door gave way only enough to reveal the captain's shoulder slumped forward. The attendant froze, then forced the door wider. A gasp rippled through the first rows. The captain and first officer sat rigid in their seats, eyes open but unfocused, hands gripping controls like statues. Their lips moved faintly, but no words came. Panic was seconds away from spreading, but the quiet woman rose from her seat before anyone else could react. For the first time on that flight, passengers noticed her. She moved with a strange authority, bypassing startled attendants and stepping straight into the cockpit. The interphone buzzed alive. A clipped female voice, unmistakable, cut into the cabin speakers. Remain seated. Remain calm. This flight will continue as planned. Passengers exchanged confused glances. Some whispered, some filmed with phones, but no one dared move. There was something in her voice. Not threatening, but commanding, like she had been here before. Meanwhile, the F-22 pilots received another transmission, this time tagged with a digital squawk. Control has been assumed. You will not engage. Divert course 10 degrees west immediately. The wingman swore under his breath. This wasn't a request, it was an order, riding their system like it belonged there, and somehow his aircraft obeyed. The autopilot flickered as if touched by invisible hands, nudging them off their intercept line. Inside NORAD, alarms lit up. "We've lost command priority on both Raptors," a tech shouted. The room erupted. No one understood how a civilian aircraft could seize control of fifth-generation fighters. The senior officer slammed a fist against the console. "What the hell is she carrying?" Hours later, when investigators pieced it together, the details would remain classified. But at that moment, all anyone knew was that an unremarkable passenger had taken control of an impossible situation. The quiet woman never explained who she was. She never raised her voice, never showed fear. She simply directed, guiding the crippled flight along a precise corridor, avoiding restricted zones, bypassing storms, until the transponder blinked back to normal and the crew, as if waking from a trance, gasped back to life. The pilots of the airliner remembered nothing. They swore they had blacked out mid-sentence and returned as though no time had passed. To them, it was an instant. To everyone else, it had been nearly 2 hours. When the plane finally touched down at a secure airbase instead of its scheduled destination, military vehicles swarmed the tarmac. Passengers were escorted off, confused and frightened, their phones confiscated. And in the middle of the line, the quiet woman stepped down the stairs, her small leather bag still in hand. No cuffs, no shouting, just a ring of suited officials waiting for her. She turned once to look at the F-22s parked in the distance. The same pilots who had heard her voice and frozen in disbelief now stood on the ground, helmets tucked under arms, staring back at her. She gave a single nod, not thanks, not apology, but acknowledgement. And then she disappeared into a black vehicle, the door closing behind her, the convoy rolling silently away. The official story released to the public the next day was simple. A transponder malfunction, a precautionary escort, a routine diversion, nothing unusual. No mention of the voice, no mention of the frozen crew, no mention of the passenger who had taken control of the skies without firing a shot. But among the men who flew those Raptors, the memory never faded. They would later tell each other quietly, in guarded conversations, she wasn't just a passenger, she was someone trained, someone with access far beyond what the public could imagine. And the strangest part? Her voice had carried a weight not of threat, but of protection. Years later, whenever those pilots were asked about the incident, they would hesitate, searching for words. And they always came back to the same line. She was just the quietest passenger, until we heard her call. And even then, their voices would lower as if the air itself might be listening.